Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming out tonight. As Mike said, and thank you to Michael and to Chaucer's for sponsoring this event. Really appreciate everything Chaucer's has done for the Literary Journal and Borda Books. And also, I want to thank them for allowing us to bring refreshments, so please stop by the cookie table if you haven't already. We have an assortment of cookies there. As Michael mentioned, this is a celebration of our 10th volume, Satellite of Love. With this volume, we did something a little different. We've always carried poetry in the Santa Barbara Literary Journal. We've always had a poetry section. But this time, we really kicked it up in terms of quality and quantity. We asked the Poets Laureate of Santa Barbara, if they would contribute to this volume. Not only did we ask them to contribute, but we asked one of them, our second Poet Laureate, Perry Longo, to be our guest poetry editor. And so this is a real powerhouse issue of poetry. If you like poetry, I encourage you to pick up a copy. The poems in here are amazing. I could not pick out a favorite one, but I could probably pick out a favorite one per poet. That's how wonderful the collection is. So, as I mentioned, Perry Longo was our guest poetry editor, and really, this collection would not have happened without Perry's diligent efforts.
Woo, Perry!
Perry, it was the city's second Poet Laureate, as I mentioned earlier, and she has been instrumental in the Santa Barbara poetry scene for decades. She's been teaching a workshop at the Santa Barbara Writers Conference since 1984. That's that's amazing. That's a pretty big accomplishment. And she has 4 volumes of poetry under her belt. Perry took on this project with gusto. It was just such a pleasure working with her on this project. She looked at the journal from a poet's eye, which I have never done myself. She counted lines, she counted spaces. She looked at how things laid out on the page. And I really hope to bring that forward into all future issues of the journal because it was really made a big difference. I'd like to actually turn things over to Perry to say a few words about the experience before we move on to the reading. Which place is it?
Thank you all. Welcome, and it's wonderful having you here. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
I was devastated when I saw there wasn't going to be a microphone, but if you can hear me, that's great. So I want to give some credit for me becoming the poetry editor to Angela Borda, who is the Silver Web editress. Is that how you say it? So she's very persuasive. I mean, look at what she did today. She arranged an eclipse for the reading just to make sure that we would be, here on time. We'd have something to write about, to think about. But what happened at the Writers' Conference last year, I think part of Angela's thought was when all the Poets Laureate descended on the conference to help teach the poetry workshop, I couldn't help but thinking when I first started doing the poetry workshop at the Writers' Conference in 1984, there was no poetry workshop. There was right brain / poetry. And I came along and I won some poetry prize, and they called me and said, how about you doing the poetry workshop? So I told them I wasn't, famous enough. I knew a lot of really great famous poets. I said, no, you'll do just fine. So last year, Angela came up and said, when all the Poets Laureate were there, because Lauren taught for some of the days, but she had a family reunion, and all of a sudden the place was riddled with Poets Laureate. So Angela comes up to me and says, how about doing a Poets Laureate? And would you be guest poetry editor? And I was very tired. So I said, yeah, I just wanted to go, it's been a week. And so it's been a very wonderful adventure. The fact that my friends, who I've known for years, the Poets Laureate, are such fabulous poets. The first thing I said to Angela is, I will not be editing their poems. They edit my poems. I don't edit their poems. I thought, well, what job is there going to be for me to do? And then I found out things like getting bios in on time and counting lines and changing this and changing that. It was a great pleasure. I had a wonderful time doing it, and now I'm going to thank Angela and Maryanne and all of my fellow poet laureates for being such great friends and fantastic poets. So
Thank you, Perry. Thank you.
All right, now, as we get started into the reading, before we actually start, I just wanted to acknowledge and actually dedicate this evening to two of the poets whose works are in the book but are not here with us any longer. And that would be Barry Spax and Sojourner Kincaid Roll. So we're going to read some of their works. We're going to start, Perry is actually going to read for us the works of Barry. So Barry Spax was our first poet laureate. He passed away in 2014, the age of 82. Barry was an accomplished educator. He was an award-winning poet, and he published 11 poetry collections during his lifetime. And he served, as I said, as the first poet laureate from 2005 to 2007. And Perry's going to read a couple of his poems for us.
And I want to thank his wife, Kimberly Snow, his dedicated wife, who, when we said, is there any way we could have Barry's poems in here? She said, well, she would go through all of his poems, which were probably about 5,000, and pick out a few. So I'm going to read 3 of them. Made Out of Words. Your Valentine poem, made out of words, entered my study and saw by my smile that it had no need to recite itself, already quite perfectly understood. Instead, gracious, it slipped with a sigh directly into my arms, where I swear it gave off the scent and feel of you, was perfectly you, as if holding a rose. Forgive me, but how can a man resist? I slowly removed all punctuation, threw off the metaphors and modifiers, articles, pronouns, prepositions. These laid aside for whenever the poem might think to read itself in public, and reached for its meaning past thought and laughter, past strive and love, give and create, in a silence so deep we fell away, your poem and I, through oceans of clouds, singing you.
Yeah.
This one is simply called Poem. One time I was in a reading with Barry, and Barry said, every poet has the right to title one poem in their whole career,
Yes.
Poem. And this is Barry's. Will it come again like this? Will we ever get it right? It is always as it is, and it passes. Never as it was, yet always somehow bright, always somehow sweet in its changes. We will never get it right. It will come, but not like this. It is always as it is, and it changes.
Yeah.
And the last poem I am going to read of his is on the next page. One of my favorite Barry Spax poems, Within Another Life. Those whose days were grudging or confused may end up trapped within another life, as a boulder, or a pane of glass, or a door that suffers every time it's slammed. If I return a boulder, love, some summer day, come sit by me and contemplate these horses and these hills. And if a window pane, gaze through to see the meadow on our walks where brown geese strut. And if I am a door, come home through me, be sure I'll keep you safe. And if a knotted, twisted rope from long self-clenching and complexity, oh love, unbind, unbraid me then, until I flow again, like wind-swept hair. Thank you, Barry.
Whoa. Probably gonna take that out before the night's over. Sorry about that, Michael. Thank you so much, Perry. Those were beautiful, beautiful poems. And now we are actually going to have another reading. Melinda Plazio, our current Poet Laureate, is going to read some of Sojourner's poems. Let me sneak out of here.
Hello.
Hi.
In silence, in peace. In silence, I settle down to write what urgings I felt, the need to speak from this high place, some heretofore unspoken word, to find an ultimate uplifting thought, a tender clarity for the troubled mind, a soothing hope for the saddened heart. In peace, I found that nameless something, smoldering like ash-baked embers, rising to fill the all of me and overflow profusely, to openly flame, burning through all barriers, through to every other soul, to heal the breach, to seal the bond. Where the hum begins. I am in a place where water rolls across the stones, rippling in ranges, too high for human tones to mimic. It is a place where mountains loom over land, so low it is almost level with the sea. In the distance, I can hear water falling fast from a high plateau, brushing the slope of the solid earth at sharp angles, diving into the flow. Where it falls, a continuous splash issues. It is the place I dwell, between calm and turmoil, between yang and yin, between memory and amnesia, between today and tomorrow, between state and want. In the magic hour when the tide changes, in the right moment where each second becomes the next, in the pool of the moon while the water ebbs and flows. In this place I stand, on land rocky like a river, land where boulders abide, deep within the soil. It is a place of peace, even as on the billowing sea.
And I forgot to actually introduce Sojourner. Sojourner was actually our Poet Laureate from 2015 to 2017. She was also a playwright, a songwriter, a nature writer, a speaker, a teacher, radio host, and that's just to name a few of the things that Sojourner was in our community. So thank you so much, Melinda, for reading that. And we will hear again from Melinda later as she reads her own work. So now actually we're going to move into all of our living Poets Laureate. And Perry is going to kick off that as well because Perry is our second Poet Laureate. So I have introduced Perry a few times, so I'm not going to introduce you again. She's going to come ahead and read some more of her own work.
One time I was introduced here at a reading, and I said it gave me pause to realize I was the oldest living Poet Laureate.
Whoops.
Yeah, so I have quotation marks around the living, but I plan to go on quite a while. So along with all the various ideas that Angela had for putting this together, there's the theme of the journal, which is Satellite of Love, and then she wanted all of our poems somehow to relate to the Satellite of Love, but they would have their own theme. So my theme was coming of age. That was the first poem in my book. And then she wanted me to do a spread. She said, "You've been around for so long. Do some of your early poems and then end up with some of your later ones." Well, I'm not going to read the older ones. There are a couple in the book, but I am going to read a relatively recent one written in 2017, I think. To the rookie woman traffic cop, one dark, not too stormy night made brighter by your flashing red lights. What did I do? You reply, tight-lipped, drove too slow. My husband is laughing his head off out beyond the vanished horizon. Her? Slow? Never. You be quiet, I tell him, besides you're dead. Things have changed. He used to call me a reincarnated race car driver when tootling along a remote road singing, "Will you still love me when I'm 64? But you don't know this. Look at me with pity, scanning my driver's license, one of the silent generation. Are you on meds? Dizzy? Your tongue congealed winter honey. No sisterhood here. I hear my husband's advice a lifetime ago when I was pulled over for speeding. Keep quiet. Don't move a muscle. Now I am dizzy. Stars that aren't out sizzle. Thunder shakes the heavens. You look up to see if it's some jet roaring off from the nearby airport, but you don't know it's him with one of his high signs from the next life. It's cataracts, I admit. All those lights, pooling, psychedelic on the wet road, slows better than dead. You slip a nauseous pink form through the cracked open window for me to report to the DMV for a road test. I'll lose my license if I don't go immediately. My spine shrinks another inch. It's past my bedtime. You and the backup cop hold me hostage over an hour, validating my license as if I were a criminal. With a little smirk, you taunt. I know you're not an axe murderer. You don't know that either. The ravages of age. And the next poem I wrote, probably about the same time. I took a trip to Ireland with my son, and we went trucking for a couple of weeks. And this poem came from that. Cliffs of Moher, County Clare. Walking the precipitous edge, the day full sun. In the distance, row upon row of birds roost in eon-chewed niches. You peer down to better hear the swish-swash of the seas crash against the walls still forging the ridge. At the drop, stomach turns like the spume inside the blue whorl. You back off at the sign posting, danger, lives lost, slipping over. A woman in a wheelchair, poised too close, gazes out, a man holding her firm. Perhaps this view, her last wish. Suddenly flashes of white, like flung arrows, distract. Fulmars and kittiwakes playing like children, gliding the spray. They whiz toward the dark cliff rise, then tour jeté back to sea and a kind of tease. Coming home. Just kidding. With exultations of souls unbound from flesh. What else can you do but run toward the tower at the very tip and lift all wing and weave?
Yay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Perry. Thank you. Our next poet laureate, unfortunately, is under the weather today. That is David Starkey. He's unable to be here tonight. But fortunately, Chris Yost has agreed to read on his behalf, so she will be joining us here shortly. David was the Santa Barbara Poet Laureate from 2009 to 2011. He was the founder of the Creative Writing Program at Santa Barbara City College, and he is also an editor and publisher at Gunpowder Press. So Chris is going to read on his behalf. Thank you, Chris. And I will introduce Chris to you a little further later. She's going to read her own work shortly.
But for now, I am the stunt David. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to have my family here. I know I'm not quite tall enough. I'm going to read two poems of David's. The first is Scoured. My two daughters chase each other in the laundromat, past the banks of speed queens, between the industrial wash-o-matics. They dart after loose buttons and puffs of lint, gifts they bring to me. Christ. $100 for a used machine, and I can't come up with it. God's benediction upon these children, but I wish they would vanish. I want the power to leave at a moment's notice, the power to tear down every single wall in my house. I want to be as clean as fresh laundry. I want a shell that's hard and whorled so deep I cannot hear the beat and drum of poverty, thumping like a clump of wet clothes in the dryer. I want. I have nothing at all to give.
Oof.
And this is a title poem from, I think, his most recent book. It's been a few weeks, so he could have another one out by now.
Yes.
This is Cutting It Loose. On weekend afternoons during the shad run in May, my father would anchor our John boat in the swirling Feather River, and we'd cast our lures, lead jigs painted red and white, called darts, into the swift current. I remember how the river accentuated the fight of each broad and gleaming fish, and how the needle nose pliers plunged into the gullets of those who'd swallowed the bait, utterly, intestines spilling from their mouths like red magician's scarves. Catch and release was my father's creed, but he was a realist. Handing me a pair of nail clippers, he'd sigh, "Cut it loose," and I'd sever the line and ease the fish back into the water, where, with a faint bloom of iridescent scales, it would disappear downward into the passing darkness.
Yeah, good poem. Woo.
All right, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much. Paul Willis, up next. Paul was our next poet laureate. He served in the position from 2011 to 2013. I guess I can say 2013 instead of 2000 now, huh? He is the author of 8 collections of poetry, 2 young adult novels, and 2 essay collections. And Paul is recently retired from teaching at Westmont College. So please welcome Paul Willis.
Thank you, Maryanne. There are some traditions that go with this poet laureate business, and when a new one is chosen, my wife Sharon makes a laurel wreath out of actual laurel leaves.
Yeah.
And then one of us former laureates usually writes a poem for the new laureate. I think Lauren still has her laurel wreath.
Yep.
I don't know what it looks like. It's sort of like Miss Havisham's wedding dress right now, I imagine.
Yeah, I still have.
But this is a poem I wrote for Sojourner when at her installation ceremony at City Hall. With this wreath, for Sojourner Kincaid Roll. With this wreath, we thee crown, poet laureate of our town. Wear it lightly, hold it fast, for our city, make it last. But should it wither, as it will, remember you're a poet still. My section is themed civic-minded, and I do think about all the people that make a city, make a country work. Here's a little poem called Litter Crew. Litter crew ahead, their budget's in the red, but still they have a sign that has always said, litter crew ahead. The younger and the older, the timid and the bolder, in a ragged line, they're down below the shoulder. In rain that makes them colder, they patiently collect the things that we eject, our wrappers and our wares, detritus of the wrecked, all hunted now and pecked. Oh, valiant litter crew, this is what you do to rectify our errors and make the roadside new. Fit gatherers, though few.
Yeah.
Ah.
Woo.
my last poem is Stevens Park, just a stone's throw from here. Oh boy, I'm the only male laureate present tonight, and I do make reference to a generic female laureate, not any one of you in particular, but Stevens Park. Purple sage and purple nightshade mingled in the morning sun, wild roses and nasturtium, sweet bay laurel lately won by our recent poet laureate, who, if she by chance were here, would give words to each new blossom, rhyme to scan this time of year. But since she dwells in the city, our own words will have to do. Who can say what is the essence of these flowers, or of you? Purple sage and purple nightshade mingled in the morning sun, wild roses and nasturtium bloom a while, and then we're done.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Paul, very much. That was lovely, lovely. And I believe both of those poems were, or two of those poems, were referring to Sojourner, right?
Well,
No, okay, never mind. That's fine. That will remain a mystery to us all. Okay, so next up, Chris Yost. So we've already heard from Chris tonight, reading on behalf of David, but Chris was our poet laureate from 2013 to 2015. Chris is an award-winning poet. She's also a designer, publisher, educator, and co-editor and publisher of Santa Barbara's Gunpowder Press. So please welcome again, Chris Yost.
Back from my recent stint as David Starkey's stunt double. I wanted to read a poem that first appeared in one of Chris Buckley's wonderful publications. Chris is here in the room, and he does Miramar and Salt. And I was very happy that he published this. It's misattributed accidentally in the listing, but I wanted to give you credit, Chris, for publishing this poem first. It's inspired by a painting at the Museum of Art of St. Lawrence, who was grilled. That was his martyrdom. So, portrait of a saint with Schwinn and barbecue sauce. I can tell you there was no one more in love with Jesus than I was one June when I was about 11, 12. I was pretty much like this icon here, my simple face and then the goldness that was really God and all his love. I might be riding my bike home and think, my whole life is a bike ride home to heaven. Most of what I knew about the Lord was from Christmas carols and AA meetings where I sat in the back with Mom. And now this hippie farm church where they did the whole pastor with guitar and singer wife scene. There were so many dogs to pet there. All it took was to say yes to God. And what did I have to lose? Nothing except my sloth. Maybe some coveting. I tell you, it was bliss to know that he had a plan, and even I was part of it. Even my peeling, scabbed up skin. I felt it riding home, my destiny. The track clear as a line to follow. To bike down your street at sunset and smell the dinner smells and know that barbecue chicken is at your own house. And God has it, all of it, under control if you just let him into your heart. St. Lawrence, I would have been there with you and the chicken on the grill while the empty-bellied neighbors cussed and crushed their empty buds. Wherever he'd wanted me to go, I would have followed him then. Those summer loves, they burn and burn all the way through autumn.
Yeah.
And this is one that David Starkey actually put in the Independent, and this is Archie. Some of you have met Archie. Inspired this poem. It's called Bony Dog. It takes a thick skin to take him, cuffed by the neck, for a walk. His fine silk and strut a draw, and then a trap. Just a whisper as we pass, a gasp, a lipsticked hiss. So thin, too thin. He leaps the razor edge from trim to bones and pelt. Treats of cheese and bits of fat don't stick. His spine a strand of beads. My skin grows thick. I put the collar on. We walk.
Oh.
Thank you.
I love that poem, Bony Dog. That's just so beautiful. We all know dogs like that, right? Thank you so much, Chris. Up next, we have Enid Osborne, who served as Poet Laureate from 2017 to 2019. Did I get that right? Okay. Sorry, I've been messing up the years here with some people. An editor as well as a poet. Enid also writes songs, stories, and film reviews. She has a full-length collection of poems, When the Big Wind Comes, and a series of themed chapped books, one titled Pedregosa Street, which includes the poems that she's going to read from our collection tonight. So with that, let's hear it from Enid.
Wow, there's a lot of people stuffed in here. I'm grateful to Chaucer's and to the editors, and it was fun working on this with everyone. My section is titled Life on the West Side, and I've lived on the West Side for a very long time. I lived in the house I'm in now for 27 years, which is big stability. It's a rental for 27 years, and it's an old Italianate Vic. It's 130 years old about, we think. So I figure if I've been there 27 years, you know, I've been there like 20% of its life, so the house cares about me. I'm part of its history. This poem is called Lázaro. Lázaro the painter sings a corrido on the stairs where the ceiling is high and boomy. He hams it up mariachi style as he rolls out the primer coat, the layer that boosts the final coat, allowing the color to shine true. Lázaro bears the name of a man who, entombed in darkness, was called forth to demonstrate the rewards of faith. Even a dead man may balk at such an offer, may choose to remain in a world dark and now familiar. But Lazarus emerges and walks into the arms of a stranger with a voice seductive as living water. Indeed, his first view of new life quivers behind a veil of tears, his brain doubting more than ever what his eyes tell him to be true. The painter's life is truth, trueness of color, no guesswork involved. Each recipe exact as a baker's. He falls in love as he fingers the sample, and again as he pries open the can. This house will be the shade of winter squash, red for the doors like blood of the bull. Not your prim old lady this, but a male Vic, square with strong cornices. Under the high eaves, Lázaro clings like a spider, reaching to accent sill and curlicue with expert stroke, the size and hair of the brush chosen for each detail. In the morning, he sings on the stairs. In the afternoon, he sings in the sky.
Wow.
These two little stories I'm going to read you are written during my first few years in the cul-de-sac where this old house is. And the area has gentrified somewhat since then, for better or worse. Cul-de-sac stories, number 2. El portero rakes the asphalt clean, not just the street in front of his house, but the whole round of the cul-de-sac. Half an hour of scratching each morning we take for granted, like mission bells. The points on his rake are worn to nubs. The railroad builds a fence at the base of the cul-de-sac to keep drug runners from hopping the trains. His side of the fence is clean. On the other side, trash crawls up the chain links. Number 3. Lion Dog makes his rounds at a jaunty tick, swinging his broad head down on every plug and post. He does not growl at strangers or unfurl his tight plume to greet a neighbor. He ignores cats and avoids that half-chow bitch at the last house. They had a thing. That's all it was. Mornings and evenings he makes his rounds. Afternoons he lies on the warm asphalt in front of his house like a perfect sphinx. Nothing raises his hairs except the Harleys. Lion Dog cringes away from the sound of glass packs as El Tigre pulls up and swipes the kickstand. 3 children pour from the house, crying, "Daddy, Daddy!" To settle a dispute, he smacks all 3. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Enid. Those were lovely poems. Next up, we have Laureate Beausolar. Laureate served as Poet Laureate from 2019 to 2021. She is an educator, an anthologist, and editor, in addition to being an award-winning poet. Laureate has authored 5 volumes of her own work and edited 6 anthologies. Let's welcome Laureate. Thank you.
Who has not, put your arm up, who has not been on Douglas Preserves on the Bluffs? That's what I thought, okay. This is a poem because there was, love has to do with it, which is, I'm sorry to say, love being old. I'm at the bare end of the bluff, blue sweater sleeves pulled over my hands, the jays and waves, the only sound. Miles away, barely visible, suspended in a shamble of chiffon mist, Anacapa Island is almost transparent. I lean against a parched eucalyptus at this Pacific edge, feeling gladly old in this young morning. Is there a word for this? Breathful. That's it. I feel breathfully old. The marine layer frays in the east, shivers through the air. Then coming from nowhere, a wind flaw whirls silver scarves into the waves and wraps the new sun inside them. This doesn't last longer than my gasp, no longer than for me to turn around, hoping that someone, anyone, would be standing here with me too, and to ask, wasn't that beautiful? I'm a widow of a fabulous poet. His name was Kurt Brown, is still Kurt Brown. So sometimes for dinner I invite other things so I don't dine alone. Tonight's dinner, companions. As the stew simmers on the stove, I set a place at the table for you. Thin, dog-eared book, I never tire of dog-earing again. And you, whirl in the wind as you flutter the book's pages, too. And you, photo of a stout Flemish farmer brandishing 7 dead muskrats. And you, memory of a Brussels attic, my hand over my first lover's hand on my heart, weighing. And you, old poet, gone, whose lines I often say aloud against the ocean's constant shush. And you, my love's baseball cap, the one he kept losing and is now on a shelf, never to be lost again. And you, reader, to whom I've been writing most of my life, this place is for you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you. I like that word, breathful. Thinking of the joy of aging. That was lovely. So we're going to close out our evening tonight, the reading portion of it at any rate, with Melinda Palacio, who is our current Poet Laureate. She's going to read a selection of her own work. We've already heard her read Sojourners earlier. Melinda's published work includes a novel and 2 volumes of poetry. And you can read her column, her weekly column in The Independent, titled Poetry Connection. So welcome, Melinda. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to also read 2 poems to close us out. Thank you everyone for coming. Hannah. The last thing I saw was the wired hanger. Emptiness pulsed inside me. A river of pain lingers. Guess I'm lucky to be alive. Somehow I awoke in a real hospital, away from the dank room, red-stained sheets, glass vials, and bloody hangers. Nurse says a boy heard me tapping out the distress signal Papa taught me. ... dash, 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 ... And something a little lighter that shows that as Poets Laureate we often collaborate, and this is from a project that Emma Trellis started with the Poetry Walk, so it was part of the Poetry Walk. Nocturnal Nescience. Last night I heard the owl again. A judge without her parliament communes with a dove. She holds fast to her power line, not meaning to lock a feathered eye on me. Me. There is much to mourn this orange-streaked morn. You. Insert any name. Her encoded verdict delivered to a mourning dove. Back and forth coos interspersed by knowing hoots. Comfort in the universal language of birds. Comes without a price. Gratitude. You, no longer roaming this earth. Me, guilty, awake at night, craving a crispy wing. I remember a raw truth. I never told you how much I love you. Thank you.
Well, that was just a beautiful, beautiful reading. Thank you so much, Melinda. Thank you to all the poets. We've actually had, everyone has read now, that has been included in the journal. So if anyone has any questions for any of the poets, or any questions for any of us, we have a few more minutes before we end the program. So,
Maybe they can all gather.
what's
around.
that? Yes, if the poets maybe could all come join us up front here, so we can get a final picture of everybody. Yes?
How are the Poets Laureate selected?
You know, I think probably one of the poets could answer that, because I know it's a city position, but I don't know how the selection is made.
It is a position that's appointed by the Santa Barbara County Arts Council, and letters of recommendation can be sent by the public. There's a nomination process. It's open for about 2 months, and people can nominate whoever they choose, and then the poet who has been nominated provides some supporting materials, some sample poems or publishing history, things like that. And then they just make their choice, and it's a little bit, just kind of happens.
People can write letters. People
Yes,
can write letters of support.
Oh,
Right.
I can't see, okay.
Yeah,
Just one second.
And they follow the same guidelines and requirements as the state poet laureate or the United States poet laureate. I mean, it's a program that's starts grassroots and goes on up.
Okay, everybody smile.
We want to get Mari
At
in
all the
there
cameras
too.
at the same time. Quick at Amy. Let it
Mari,
Angela.
we want Mari in there too. So
Where?